So here we are today. And like I said earlier, I really enjoy um, discussions more than um, me doing a monologue. Um, for those of you who don't know, I spent 25 years in the liberal progressive ministry, so I've done lots of preaching and I've heard myself preach enough. Um, and so, but what I really enjoy most about the Dhamma and these types of things is actually talking about what's going on in our practice. And so hearing from you really helps in all that. And if you're not sure what to talk about, it can be anything as long as it's sincere. They can be outlandish questions that I could never answer as long as they're sincere. I will respond to them. You can think about what's going well in your practice, because the way Bhante teaches us, we're always looking at the leading edge of the practice and developing things from there. You can also look at what's holding you back, what difficulties are coming up, because if we can release or untangle those a little bit, it just frees up the rest of the practice. And it's also legitimate, just things that you wonder about, questions that you have, anything that is, is genuine for you. So let me just open it up, and what we can do is if you have a comment or a question or something, you can stick your hand up, and if you got your camera on, we'll see you. If you don't have your camera on, your hand will be up for a long time and we'll never know it. So please.
I just want to start with this then. For me is, when I'm sitting down practice, it's formal, I would say formal practice, which is not too bad. But lately with the work and a lot of family, so like day to day, like building into the practice, into the daily activities. How can I make it really useful, and plus the Four Noble Truths to build into my daily practice. If you can, elaborate a little bit on that, that would be really wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. If I'm hearing you there, it feels like there's actually two questions there, both of which are really, really important. One is how to incorporate the Four Noble Truths, and I would say, as my understanding of it, is the Four Noble Truths. They're really not noble truths as much as they are meditation instructions. Yeah. And so we can spend a little time, talking about how those translate directly into practice. But your first question is, just given the rough and tumble of everyday life, pandemic or otherwise, how do you work with that throughout the day? And for those of you who've been on long retreats, a wonderful thing about a retreat is that life is really, really simplified. And during that time, the mind and the heart, naturally could get very, very quiet. But when you're out living your daily life with family and work and stuff, there's all kinds of stimulus and stuff that's going on. And the mind and heart can be very responsive to all of that and can get jerked around and all over the place. Probably the most important thing to understand about all that is it's perfectly natural. It's perfectly normal when you're living, life that's got lots of stimulation and stuff, that when you sit down, the mind is not going to just, drop like a rock through the water and go and just sit down there. There'll be lots and lots of stuff going on. And that's fine. It's fine. What's important is not what arises. What's really important is just how you respond to it, and if you respond to it skillfully. the first thing that's really important in all that are the 6 R's. And so when you recognize that your mind and heart and attention and stuff has gone all over the place, my favorite thing used to be, as soon as I noticed that, is sort of automatically condemn myself. And I've got some good German blood, and the most important thing to realize about that is it's just really not helpful. That's, we go all over the place all the time. So to recognize, release, relax, re-smile at some uplifted qualities, return, repeat, is actually just an incredibly skillful way. If you were enlightened, you wouldn't need the 6 R's, but this side of enlightenment, we're all going to go out of balance at times, and just having a way to respond skillfully with that is really, really helpful. Beyond that, with how you practice, there are just lots and lots of different ways you can approach things. One of the things that I found very helpful of late is when the mind goes off, just notice the quality, what I would say is of the voice in the mind. Notice, what your mind is doing. You recognize, release, relax, etc. But just noticing that and noticing the quality of the voice. I find in terms of a self-identity that probably unwittingly, unknowingly, I identified more with the voice in my head than about anything else I ever experienced. And it can be really freeing to just hear the mind. So my mind likes to explain things a lot. Sometimes it likes to complain. Sometimes it likes to argue. And to just see and hear all those things, it's just what comes up in the mind. They arise because of causes and conditions, and seeing how to identify with those. And as soon as you can see that, then you can recognize the identification, release it. Relax is a really important part. Re-smile and return. And in none of that are you actually trying to stop the mind doing what it's doing. You're just letting it be and responding to it in a skillful way. And the mind will gradually quiet itself, on its own. We don't have to force it. If you try to force the mind to quiet, what you get is the forcing. You don't get the quiet. But it's amazing as you just sit there and allow stuff to, come and go and respond to it skillfully with the 6 R's, etc. It's just amazing that after a while, I just notice the mind is quieter. And it's usually not an even up and down. I mean, an even gradient, that as the mind gets quieter, it may open up a little pocket of tension that you didn't realize was there. And so you can get very quiet, and then a little geyser of stuff will come up. And you just respond to it the same way. There's 6 R's, and then over time, it goes like this. It quiets more, but there's always this up and down, and that's normal and natural. If you look at the 4 Noble Truths as meditation instructions, I actually use that a lot in my practice. And I'll just go through these quickly, because we could go on for a long time with those. But the first one, the language in the text is suffering is to be understood. Suffering is to be understood. And understand here doesn't mean intellectual analysis. It just means, openness so that you can see it. And so in terms of practice itself, I like to translate suffering is to be understood as turning towards. Right? You're not going to understand something unless you're turning towards it and looking at it. You don't have to analyze it as something. You just have to open up and be with it in a relaxed, open way. So a bunch of junk comes up in my mind, and I turn towards it, and I just recognize, oh, there's a bunch of junk going up in there. So we turn towards. The second noble truth says that tanha, it's a tricky word, but tension is to be abandoned. And it's a very, very dramatic term. When I'm looking at the text, I like to get, I'm not that great a Pali scholar, so I like to get translations from 3 or 4 or 5 people that I trust, scholars that I trust, and they almost all translate this word the same as abandon. And tanha is tension. And so what the Buddha was saying is tension is to be abandoned. How do you abandon tension? You relax. You don't mess around with it. You just walk away from it. And the 6 hours are very skillful way. So you turn towards whatever is going on. And then just within that, you notice if there's any tension, and if there is, you just allow it to soften, allow it to release, allow it to relax, and just be there. The third noble truth is a little trickier to translate in the text. It is Nirodha is to be realized. So Nirodha is lots of ways of describing it. It's a deep state of equanimity, a deep state of equanimity. So what you're doing when you're practicing, recognize, releasing, relaxing, smiling, returning, repeating, the mind is getting quieter and quieter and quieter. And at some point you begin to see that even to perceive something, and Buddhism, to perceive something is like putting a label on it. Oh, that's a tree. Oh, that's my breath. Oh, that's Frank. To see something is to label it a little bit. And when you're sitting and the mind gets quieter and quieter, you realize it takes a little bit of tension to put the label on it. And so as the mind gets quieter and quieter, at some point, those labels just relax and you stop even doing that much. To remember something takes a little tiny bit of tension in it to kind of push it into memory. And so if you're sitting there with that deep equanimity and something comes back and the mind doesn't react to it, it's just quiet. And so what happens as it gets deeply relaxed is that perception and memory go offline. And the subjective experience of that is a little blank spot. You've got no memory of what happened. It's a little bit of quiet. And a lot of people, when they experience this, at first in deep meditation, they think that they've nodded off, because you look back and there's this, it's as if you went to sleep. And we all do, so that happens. But in this particular case, the mind is actually quite luminous at that point. So that's what Nirodha is technically. So, and the word realize, Nirodha is to be realized. The word realize here, what it really means, remember the Buddha wasn't speaking English. It means to make real. So how do you make something real? You just let it soak in. If there's a peacefulness, you let it soak into your bones. The difficulty for us humans is that we are much more sensitive to pain and suffering than we are to well-being. It's an evolutionary thing. It's just an evolutionary thing. So the way I like to describe it is, you imagine a million years ago, two human ancestors walking through the primordial forest, and they look over there and there's some fruit hanging on a tree. And they look over there and there's a cave bear coming down the path towards them. So one of these two ancestors is much more sensitive to pleasure than to pain. So there's fruit, there's a bear, he goes for the fruit, and the bear eats him. And he gets taken out of the gene pool. The other one is more sensitive to pain and suffering and fear. And he notices the bear and deals with the bear, maybe attacks it, maybe runs or something, but he's more likely to live. So it's just the forces of evolution have bred us to be more sensitive to difficulties. And so part of what the Buddha taught and what Bhante teaches a lot in his teachings is that when good feelings come up, when there are good states that arise spontaneously, it really helps to be sure that we recognize them, and just be with them. So the word I like to use for that is savoring. So the first three noble truths, you get turning towards, relaxing into, and then savoring any uplifted qualities. And that allows them to become realer to us. So I said in the beginning, I wasn't going to do long talks, and I just talked for a long time. So maybe I'll just step back from at that point, and if you have comments you'd like to make on this, or if there's any part of it's not clear or other questions, please chime in.
Hi, Doug.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much. I'm very new to the group, but I'm very blessed to have been able to join. And today is my last day of the retreat. That was like with Kin, which is very wonderful. And I started to actually have listened to one of your talks, which is very daunting. And I'm very blessed to be able to have access and introduced it by Kin to everyone here. And just want to say a little thanks to to everybody first. I have just when you're talking about the looking at our minds, that when we are in our daily lives, which Kin was bringing up, which is also my question, how to within the 6 hours more mindfully. Sometimes with a bigger stimuli, I find it much easier. But when it is not a big stimuli, very subtle things, I still tend to forget. I understand how well this 6 hour tool is already with us, but yesterday I have more activities. I mean, in terms of the past few days, and I experienced myself a little bit very in compared to the sitting and in the daily personal practice within myself, which much easier. Whereas when I have to face the real world, it was really that 6 hours is gone. And you're mentioning that that we have to watch our mind, that how that mind works. And I do have that experience before the practice, that I was able to put aside a second observation of this person, like Helen, and I find it a little bit not sure which is correct to be doing things like that. I always have a little voice at the back sometimes before I'm trying to align it. I find it was a little bit deviating, and I can see myself deviating in that thought, but that little thing helps me to be happier. I don't know whether it's correct. I have always this question that if I step...
what is it that makes you happier? Noticing the voice?
noticing the voice at the beginnings in the previous experience is a little bit like very puzzling, very uncertain, but it's to the state that now it is like I'm happier to see that little like things going on. But I wasn't sure this is safe. I asked Bante one time, it was at the beginning, and it is not good to have a talking to that particular like thing. So I stopped doing that, but I still see that like if I'm in that mode, I am much more like delighted or light. Like it's a lighter feeling that I can be a little bit more sarcastic with myself. Like, so how do you address to that, and how do you see that that things happening? Is it like that I would be able to more clear that I would draw myself out of a very tense mode that I usually and with my previous. Sorry, I'm talking a little bit extensive here, but since you are talk to be more of a every open corner, so I'm just directing here to give myself a little bit of hints from everyone and you.
Yeah. I guess the first thing I would say about the practice is, how can I say, it's perfectly safe, and that it, and particularly the way Bhante teaches, it tends to be self-correcting. So, in the beginning, we may intellectually understand the instructions and end up actually following maybe 10%. The mind goes off, there's old habits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's this question I always like to ask people. What happens is there are usually many qualities in the mind at once. And so if there are wholesome qualities in the mind, metta, kindness, awareness, compassion, forgiveness, etc., and there are unwholesome qualities, anger, tightness, fear, etc., etc. So you have wholesome and unwholesome qualities in the mind at the same time. Which one wins? What do you all think? The wholesome wins. The wholesome wins. Original sin is like really baked into Western culture, even if we don't believe that. We always think the bad ones, but the wholesome actually wins. And so I just think that's incredibly good news, because what it means is that you don't have to worry about getting rid of the unwholesome qualities. If you try to get rid of the unwholesome qualities, that's just aversion. And aversion is not particularly wholesome, What you do is you cultivate the wholesome, and the wholesome will take care of the unwholesome qualities. So, for example, clear awareness is incredibly wholesome. And so if there's a bunch of jumbly garbage going through your mind and you're able just to see it clearly, I'm assuming some of you experience this, if you just see it real clearly, gradually the strength of the unwholesome will sort of recede off into the background a little bit. So, you were sitting there and you were seeing some of the qualities of the mind. And just what happens out of that is there's a little bit of, I don't know, maybe joy, maybe too strong a word, but there's some uplift that come in just from the seeing. So what I like to say is that, you take care of the mind, and the mind will take care of you. So what are some of the other parts of your question there?
I was asking also like Kin on this, like a little, what are the hints? It's the same question. What Kin is, how to have a little extra light to remind us to have the 6 hours on the very subtle like daily activities that we can't lead the way. Like it was very totally like we are in the activities and our mind is all in that mode. So it is, I find it all good over the sitting and during the days without any like interactions. But once we are back into the real world, I do find the 6 hours less. I thought I have it. I was with it, but I didn't able to access to it yesterday. I mean, so it was something that maybe there is like a, we were told to maybe the smile, but sometimes we forgot that. And also like when we're at one doorway or doing that, and I forgot about that. So it was like we need a little bit more like a label somewhere to bring it up. So
Yeah. So
it was
first of all, dependent origination, causes and conditions. Everything arises out of causes and conditions. So you're sitting in a retreat. There's very few distractions going on there, and you're with a bunch of people who are doing the practice with you, even if it's over Zoom. And those create conditions in which allow the mind to go get very, very quiet. Then you go back out into your daily life where, there's fights and squabbles and pushes and pulls and things to get done. It's busy, busy, and big surprise. The mind gets a little more rattled. So the first thing to say about that is, I just want to say, this big surprise. Big surprise. You get out in a more jumbly environment, the mind is more jumbly. But what I would say is that, again, the practice is self-correcting. And if you can get a few moments every once in a while of peacefulness in the middle of a very busy day, to use the old-fashioned language, the merit, the value, the gain from that is actually quite great. The results of that may not be as quiet as you're sitting on, as you are when you're sitting on retreat, but to learn to be able to 6 hours just even a little bit during your daily life. First of all, don't be surprised if the mind gets more jumbly, and it will gradually quiet down. It's just you're doing it in a different setting, so the results are going to be a little bit different, but the practice remains the same, and the results will accumulate over time. So give yourself some slack. First of all, what happens if you push too hard is the mind will just tighten up and it gets discouraged. So the little phrase that I use for myself sometimes is big surprise. I'm out here in the middle of all this jumble and stuff, and my mind is jumbled all over the place. Big surprise, of course it is. And you just come back and recognize, release, relax as best you can. I also find that, and on retreat, I'm sure you find this too, is that we talk about the 6 hours as if they are 6, different bowling balls lined up or something. You go from one to the other. But of course, particularly if you're on retreat, as you practice it, as they start to roll together, we call it rolling the R's. So as you recognize something, just seeing it clearly tends to release. You tend to release it and just let it be. You're not fighting with it as much. And as you're not fighting with it, as you release it, there's a tendency for the tension, to drain out of the mind. As the tension drains, it's natural for uplifted qualities to come up, and as the uplifted qualities come, then it's natural to go back to the object, your primary object. And so, I don't know, we've got a technical word, a lot of yogis call it whooshing, it's just a whoosh, as you go through the 6 hours. And so then as you go back into your daily life, to stop, as you're walking down the street or, getting out of your car, and to go point by point through the 6 hours, can be very, very difficult. but to just allow that sense of relaxing, and go through them. And there's the 6 R's. There's whooshing, which is like 1 R, and then there's an in between, which are the 3 essential practices, the first 3 of the 4 Noble Truths. So you're out there walking around, and you just turn towards whatever you experience. Something comes up and you turn towards and open up to it. Relax any of the tension in it. And if there are any uplifted qualities, you just let them soak in a little bit. So that's a shorter version of them. And I find that sometimes walking around, I can recognize, I can turn towards, relax into, and savor, even in busier situations. I might not be able to do all 6. So if you just play around with all of those, then you can develop a little more confidence in them. And again, I just can't say this often enough. What I learned from Bhante is the practice is self-correcting. And so if you just get it a little bit right, it will increase over time.
Okay. I think I got a little bit worried. I'm not sure where exactly when you were just talking about. I just want to make myself clear on this very particular part that you're talking. Allow the group, give me 1 more minute just to make sure I'm right there. That is when we were trying to everyday thing, when we are perceiving, because the perception that we are getting in there is that point that is already a suffering. We cannot allow that cognition things to happen, right? It was right there. And it is at that point the suffering already starts. That is how we bring the 4 Noble Truths in, and we recognize it right there. That is everything around is here is just like a as you say, is a biological, like innocent, like a thing that was like just right on there for you. And if we have that always that like that this is just a reception. It's not about you. So we are more standing out. And sometimes that little thing that happened to me is that when I'm standing out, I'm a little bit happier. But the way that the deviation, that was the problem. But then I still see that what you bring up is what I perceive right here is just to see, oh, this is the first part of that suffering that happening is it can be a suffering, but we are already there in that mode that it is going to start to.
And if I can interrupt you, because there's a phrase here at the beginning, I want to be sure to catch this. It's not that you do it, right? What the Buddha said is suffering is built into this world.
Yeah.
And so it happens.
Yeah.
And so it's not our fault. It happens. We just need to respond to it.
Yeah.
In a skillful way.
Mm. This is what I mean, that when we see it, if we, it's already like that recognition is uncontrollable. Like it is already like, yeah, it's uncontrollable. So if we are standing out, that then we are not at that point being captured by it. So that is where we have the craving, right? So if we are a little bit able to, oh, this is just like, what's going on is going on, though, then we are standing out. And that thing, then you are a little bit apart from that that craving, that creating suffering. That suffering is naturally there, that the first Noble Truth. The way of noticing it is just that if you are standing out, then you are actually watching it. So to happen whether you have that crave on it or not.
Yeah, so there's craving, and I prefer just the word tanha, because craving is kind of off the charts, and tanha can be craving. It can also be just longing. It can be very soft, but so there is that tightening, and the awareness itself. Again, as you have wholesome and unwholesome qualities, awareness is very wholesome. And so as you see that with clear awareness, it's not that the tension The craving will disappear immediately. But sometimes what happens is what you experience is there will be this little bit of well-being that comes up at the same time. So it's not trying to get rid of the craving, the tension, the tata, but it's just seeing it, and it will gradually recede on its own.
Yes, okay. I already have a little tension I recognize right here, that the way that I talk and the tense that I have right on. Yeah, I think I got your point. Thank you.
Great,
Yeah.
great, yeah. So particularly as you can see that, if you can see the tension, because in the Buddhist practice, as I understand it, there are lots and lots of different ways to cultivate a wholesome mind. And the Buddha put a tremendous amount of emphasis on the awareness itself, of just seeing what's going on. But the other thing that he did was to, the place that's a little more active in his practice is in the relaxation step. So you're going along and there's all this stuff going on, and I did this and that, and there's all this. And if you can just see the tension, the tightness that's in that, and it's easier to see that if you just let the other stuff run on, rather than try to fight all of it at once. Let that run on. Just notice if there's any tension, and if there is, well, I usually say relax it, but even that can be a little too much too. It's you invite it to soften. And what it turns out is the tanha, the tension, that tightness, whether it's craving or whether it's just, oh, I wish my life, just a slight yearning or anywhere in between, that tension is the fuel for the suffering. And so rather than try to stop the suffering, the Buddha was talking about is just let the fuel drain out. And you'll notice, and I think that's probably where some of your smile comes from, is that the shell of the suffering may remain for a little bit, but without the tension in it, there's this lightness that comes in. And then you can get this place that feels a little crazy sometime, where there's the suffering and you're smiling. I find myself when I'm out walking along the American River, I live not far from the river out there, and I'll go out there and I'm carrying all the tension I've been carrying all day, but I'm a little bit lighter, and I look up at the trees, and I see the trees really don't care whether I'm enlightened or in deep pain, And I look at the trees, and suddenly I don't care whether I'm enlightened or deep pain, at the moment. And then, so there's a suffering that's going on, and then I find as I walk along that I'm smiling like an idiot. I don't even know where that came from, So it's possible for all these qualities to mix in together.
Yeah, thank you. It makes sense to me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, thank you. I allow time for others. It's very long, time that you have.
Well, these. So let me just say to everybody that I don't think there's any question that any of you could ask or hold inside that there aren't a bunch of other people that have their version of that. So I know it does put you on the spot if I respond to you for a long time, but I'm doing that because I'm sure other people have their versions of this. So when you're asking a question like that, you think you're asking for yourself, but it's also for the benefit of others.
Thank you.
Hi, Doug. I have a question. Actually, it's an experience, which I realized because of craving, whichever the feelings comes, it's a temporary, because if there is a one object I recently bought something, when I want to get that object, I was so nervous and such a craving I had in mind. Now later on, day by day, when I see the same object, I feel that the feelings start from the craving that is not there anymore for me. And now what will happen is, I want to buy junk.
You broke up for a little bit. So when you see that, what happens?
Now there is no that whatever the craving time, whatever the feelings comes, that it's not anymore.
Oh,
I realized that because of craving, some feeling comes that not stable or not permanent.
mhm.
And now what is happening, we'll say I want to buy a chair. Recently, I imaged that chair on my head. This chair is suits for this place. So all of a sudden, with the same thought, suddenly it came to me uh, that even if I get this, it will be normal for the few days after that feelings go away. Now I realize something craving, even though I start, if I go to shopping or somewhere, even if I start with a craving, that is temporary. Craving is become temporary, and whatever the feelings comes, it's become temporary.
Yeah, that's great. That's lovely. And of course, um, they are temporary if there are wholesome qualities along with it. Um, and one very wholesome quality is actually patience. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we live in a culture that tries to move at the speed of light, but the feelings and stuff, you know, the craving, the tightness, the wanting, all that stuff, it moves at a more organic pace. You know,
Mm-hmm.
just because you see it doesn't mean it automatically evaporates. But if you are viewing it with some patience, with some openness, with some wholesomeness, um, and and when you're out shopping, another thing that you can do while doing all that is just, um, I wouldn't say try to do this constantly, but as often as you remember, just send out a little kindness to people around you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every time you think of it. If you try to make that a steady practice, you probably won't be able to do it. But just every time you think of it, just send out, you know, you see somebody over there, you know, a child with an ice cream cone um, or an old man who's looking grumpy or something, and, you know, you just send a little bit of kindness on them to them and move on, you know, allow a little bit of lightness to come into the mind. Then that will also, um, you know, affect whatever tanha, whatever craving and grasping you have, and will tend to change it. But again, it moves at its own pace. And as you say, it actually takes a little while. I sometimes am very quick to discouragement. You know, I'll see what's going on in my mind and I'll send out a little bit of kindness, or I'll try to see it really clearly. And, you know, and 10 seconds later, you know, well, mine still feels a little grumpy. It's like a big surprise, you know. And this is particularly, I know, it's walking along the river because, you know, it's such a kind of wholesome environment. And then after a while, I sort of realized, oh, you know, all those tight feelings that I was so concerned about have somehow just, you know, evaporated on their own. And so as you see that, whether it's shopping or whatever you're doing, gradually what that does is it builds, it's a quality that comes kind of slowly in the West, but it's sada, it's faith, it's actually confidence, you know, that the practice works and that how we do stuff really works. And as we can relax a little bit and just give it time, then you'll just see that shifting over and over again and have a little less angst. It doesn't go away right away.
Yeah, that means now I'm not getting that much of craving of the materialistic stuff.
Yeah.
I feel it's going to be normal anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's really most important in all this stuff is it's not that the craving or the tightness be gone, but that the mind, heart be kind of moving in the right direction. And as long as it's moving in the right direction, then we can just, you know, keep going and it will take care of itself. And it will happen more organically that way. And by the way, one of the difficulties, you know, in talking with a bunch of people in a group is that how all this manifests in us will be slightly different because of our personalities and our history and causes and conditions. And so it's helpful to allow for that, a little bit of slack in there, so you can see how all this stuff works for you as you were describing. Other people have, want to jump in on this one at all? This is something I think happens to a lot of us.
Maybe to add, it's not the things in themselves that are bad. It's the way we respond to them that can be wholesome or unwholesome. So you can smell a rose and enjoy the smell, but that is a very different experience from seeing and smelling the rose and thinking that you want to have it, you want to buy it, what kind is it, will it fit into your garden, and things like that. Yes. So maybe referring to what Helen said, all these things that we experience are not in and of themselves all bad. It's just the way we, how we experience them, that makes it wholesome or unwholesome. Just to add to that, maybe.
Yes, good, thank you. It's a very important point. It's that the objects out there are not good or bad. They're not enlightened or evil. It's just the way that we relate to them.
We keep relating to reality in a way that makes it personal. If there is a tree in my garden, I experience my garden. It's my piece of ground. It's my tree that I know, that I've seen for years. And it's not. It's just a piece of nature. It has nothing to do with me. So everything we see, everything we experience, we tend to put a little label on. It's my experience. It's my thing that I am seeing. And when you are truly mindful, then it's just an experience without any emotion or personality attached to it. It's just a thing.
Yes, absolutely. And as I was saying before, one of the things that we identify with most strongly is the voice in our mind. Yes. And it was, I mean, this sounds silly to say, but it was really shocking to me at one point, because my mind, as I said before, it does a lot of explaining. And so my mind will go on explaining something. It was just the realization, there actually is nobody there. It's like, and I felt, I don't know how to describe it. And if you know the old Roadrunner cartoons where the coyote was chasing the Roadrunner and runs off a cliff, and gets, way, way out there, and suddenly realizes he's run off the cliff and there's nothing under it. And that's what it felt like to me. It's like I had this mind explaining this thing to everybody, and there's actually nobody there in the mind. It's just explaining what's happening.
Yes.
And that's where I could see how much I identify with that voice. There's a tightening around that voice, and as I allow that to relax, then the mind gets very quiet. But then I still have to deal with being Wile E. Coyote 500 feet off in the air.
Yeah. I have the same, but I've learned to see that I am reinforcing certain things. So I do a lot of explaining as well. So I am just in that way reinforcing, continuing it in my head, these explaining thoughts. When I see a certain movie or something and I have strong emotions about that,
it's no wonder that it comes up in the meditation. Everything we experience, we are drawn to it, whether with aversion or with lust or desire, that will make its way into the mind. While actually, when I really think about it, all these thoughts, I can't even be sure they would be mine. Just because I noticed them doesn't mean that they are truly my thoughts and not just some random things floating through my head, so to speak. So that, I think that's how a personality also develops, because we pay attention to certain things and we are drawn to certain things, and we are reinforcing the mind in that sense.
Yeah, and to realize what's behind those thoughts is just random neural firing.
Exactly. It's
And
nothing.
if you've had an experience, you know, there's this firing that goes on in the brain, and then there's a residual thing that happens, and then we don't have to glorify that, but it's just it's a big surprise.
Yeah, and then the meditation becomes a lot easier when you don't take all these thoughts personally, when you don't see this is my restlessness or my aversion, but it's just the way the mind is in that moment. And then it's a lot easier to apply the 6 R's right effort. Because when you see all these things as my experience, then they tend to stick along for the entire meditation.
And so just take it one step further, because you can fall into a trap of trying to get rid of the identification, which, or you can just see, oh, identification is happening.
Yes.
And then see if you can recognize the tanha, the tension in it, and there always is.
Yes.
And so you don't stop the identification, but you feel the tension in it and allow that to soften. And then the identification just gradually runs out of gas.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So some of the phrases that I use every morning, I do refuges, precepts, and aspirations, and one of the lines that I use of trying to point to, you know, the experience that you're talking about underneath behind it, is that when sending and receiving kindness feel the same, self dissolves into contentment, and ambition fades into timeless presence. And so it's not like those disappear in a flash, but they just sort of gradually fade and just dissolve out into everything.
Yes.
Is that a familiar experience to other people? Those moments where just...
Well, for me, it's very fast. It doesn't fade, but as soon as I recognize it, it's gone. But
I'm a Taurus. We move at a slower pace.
Yeah, well, doesn't matter. Yeah.
The only thing that matters is that we're pointed in the right direction.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think when you are truly mindful, truly aware, that then the self disappears instantly.
Yeah, you can, because I spent a couple of years, this is many years ago, but in my practice, trying to pin down what the self was. And it was actually quite fruitful for me because I mean I didn't have the, this is long before I met Bhante and stuff like that, but I kept on trying to pin down what the experience itself was, like, turning towards it and just seeing it, and I could never get there. It's like I get closer and closer and it will evaporate. And I'm slow, so it took me a couple of years of doing that before I really got it. That no, there is no self there. It's just this mirage.
Yes.
So the self is not a bad guy. It's a nothing. It's just a puff in the air. And if we think of it as a bad guy to get rid of it, that just reinforces it. And there will always be a little bit of tension, at least a little bit of tension, sometimes a whole lot. And so if you look at your sense of self and feel a little bit of gripping inside it and let that soften, then it fades. And the trick of it is that you can say, oh, where's myself? Well, just asking the question creates it.
I feel the notion of self is just an evolutionary thing that evolved out of danger and out of the need to feed and things like that. I think it evolved. So again, it's like you said, it's not a bad thing in and of itself, but it's, I don't know, it has gone out of hand, and now comes along with a lot of craving and clinging and habitual tendencies.
Yeah, I don't even know that it's gone out of hand. It's just, but as you say, I think it's just a mechanical process. The man or the woman who saw a saber-toothed tiger and took it personally was more likely to reproduce than the one who had the nice kitty. And so it acquired into us, not because it's good or bad, but just because of the sheer mechanics of reproductive evolution. It's nothing. There's nothing more to it than that. And it always involves tension. And so you'll notice that when you feel threatened or angry, your sense of self will be really dense and concrete and unavoidable. And when you're lying on the beach, at the end of a lovely day, there actually is no self there unless you look for it. And then as soon as you start looking, it's there. But when you're just watching the sun go down, it's irrelevant. So self is always, as you say, has some sense of threat associated with it. So other kinds of questions or concerns?
So I had a question. My name's Daniela.
Hi, Daniela.
Hi.
Can you turn your video on?
Sure. I just had a thought based on your last comment. So is self-ego?
Yeah, ego is a little bit more tightly defined word, but I think for the common use of the word, ego, sense of self, to the extent that those are interchangeable. Ego has a lot of moral vectors attached to it, particularly in spiritual circles. But
because when you said self is just think of self as a bad guy, because I often have looked at ego and how to eliminate ego and live my life without ego. Then when you said that, I thought, okay, then maybe self is connected or is the idea of ego. So, because I didn't understand.
Trying to get rid of yourself. I don't know what it is I said, but if I said you need to get rid of
the idea of self is a bad guy. Sorry, the idea of self is a bad guy.
The self is not a bad guy. The self has a good heart. The self
Okay.
the self is trying to take care of us. It's trying to protect us, to get what we want, etc. It just doesn't have any wisdom.
Okay. Okay.
It's just not very wise. It's heart in the right place. It's just,
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you. It just popped up, self, and maybe that's ego, because I'm trying to just figure out ego for years.
yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, and who was the guy, forget who it was, who said, you have to love yourself before you can lose it.
oh, okay.
Because people in this thing about the self is bad and you got to get rid of it. Well, that just sets up fear and tension and stuff in the mind. But as even as David was, directing earlier, sending metta to yourself, sending kindness to yourself.
Yes, that was yes.
As
Okay.
it feels with love and kindness and ease, it naturally evaporates.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
try to get rid of it is it just strengthens it.
Oh, okay. Those words are really cool. Okay, thank you.
So I used to think of it as self has Asperger's. It's just
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Any-
Yeah, I just had hello, Doug, and everyone.
hi.
Hi, I feel excited to talk to you and anxious.
Oh, I'm scary.
It's funny we both feel the same, so it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. Like anxiety and excitement, it's like the same, like increasing heart rate and like sweaty palms and racing thoughts.
No, excitement, turns to fear when it folds in on itself. And so if you give in to the excitement, even in fear, if you relax into the energy of it, it can actually turn into excitement and then disperse.
Ooh,
But anyway, that's
kind of
and
what
that's more complicated.
I'm trying to do right now. I had sort of okay, I just wanted to say that Austin and I are in the middle of reading Befriending the Mind, the book that you wrote.
Mhm.
And this is kind of a silly question, but the cover of the book is really soft and velvety. Was that intentional? Did you have any part making that?
I've looked at, do any of you know Unsplash? It's a website that actually a lot of photographers and artists post on. And these are high resolution photographs, and some of them they're just thousands of them, and they're lovely. And part of the deal with Unsplash is that if you post on it, then it becomes public property, that anybody can use it. So I was looking around Unsplash to try to find something for the cover for Befriending the Mind. And I got about 5 or 6 of them. And the one that's on there was very different than the other ones. And when I showed them to my wife, she said, no, that's the one you have to use. And so it really has, that was the extent of my thinking on it. And as you said that, I recognized it, and I like I think I like the softness of it and the mood. And it was a little hard to sort of pin down exactly what it was. And as I saw that stuff, I thought, okay, maybe we'll go with this one.
Well, the actual texture of it, the way it feels, it's soft. I don't know. I've never felt a book like that where it's it feels like velvet. I don't know. I just I thought it was really cool. I was about to go grab it. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know that, this is what the cover is. Yeah. And so and I think the other thing about it is that there's a mix in there of spaciousness and then some really dense parts of it, and I think that's what was appealing. I didn't go through this intellectual process of doing that, but it was sort of vetting what my reaction was to it, and that's how it got there.
Yeah, I also like in the book how you mentioned like if the meditation isn't coming easily, to just like, and instead of fighting it, to just like go take a nap sometimes. Because
Well,
I start to get really drowsy in the I meditate in the mornings and I start to get really drowsy, and I tend to fight it a lot, but then I think it makes it more tense. And so sometimes I do have to like just take a break from it. So yeah, that's been helpful, because I think like it's gonna be progress, right? Like I'm not gonna be in meta all the time. It's gonna take time. So like I don't have to rush it, right?
yeah, yeah. God give me patience, and I want it right now. Yeah, it really takes a lot of relaxation, and some of it is knowing yourself. And I, in my teaching and stuff, I find that there's a balance between putting energy in the practice and ease. And I find that in the West, for everybody who doesn't put enough energy into it, there are about 20 people who put too much energy into it. So for most of the people, the balancing is really more in the direction of relaxing it, taking it easy, let it come at its own pace. There are a few people who need to crank it up a little bit. A lot of the Theravadan practices in the United States came, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, back in the day. And they did a lot of training in Southeast Asia. And I did some training in Thailand. And, the Thai people have got to be some of the mellowest, sweetest people that I have ever met. And so for those people, the teachers there, they were trying to get them to tighten up a little bit to get them balanced. But me as a Westerner to go over there and try to tighten up a little bit, it just didn't work.
Yeah. Well, my family is from Mexico, but I grew up in America, so there is a cultural difference that I've noticed.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So I have to I find myself like finding the balance between.
And I'm a strong believer in empirical trials and to really try it and see what works to you. One of the things that was very revealing to me, my German blood, is that I began to notice in my practice that if I sat down to practice and I was really diligent, 6 hours and everything, and just stay on top of it, over the course of about 45 minutes to an hour, my mind would quiet down and settle. And that seemed really lovely. And then sometimes I would go in and I wouldn't do that. And I would sit down and my mind would go crazy. It was like a drunken banshee, zapping around all over the place for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then it would drop into this deep stillness. And I realized I can either apply a lot of discipline and have my mind quiet down in 45 minutes to an hour, or I could completely relax and it would quiet itself in about 5 or 10 minutes. And so that was helpful for me to see that and to not get as concerned if my mind is bouncing around a lot. And I think in neurological terms, it just makes it, personal for me. I pick up a lot of static during the day. I sit down, it's going to take a while for that to run out and just give it space. But that technique doesn't work all the time. There are sometimes I can sit down and let the mind go and it'll just wind up on itself and wind up more and wind up more and wind up more and wind up more and wind up more. But over time, by playing with all of that, I can recognize a little more quickly when the mind is just running something out and it just needs to run itself out. I have a grandson who is 3.5 years old and lives down in Southern California. But when they come out and visit us, they live in a very compact space. And he gets here And I look at them and I just think that little pony has to run. And so he gets out here, and there's some the greenway along the American River, and we got more of a yard, and he can run out. He runs the energy out and quiets down. And sometimes the energy, the mind is like a pony that needs to run a little bit. And the other thing that you said that I would really tune into, and this I kind of learned it from Bhante, is that when you're physically tired, it's just harder to practice. It's just, and when you're well rested, it's easier. And sometimes, when you're tired, you may want to practice anyway. But I'm like you. So when I go on retreats, when I'm doing it at home, I don't have the freedom of schedule. But when I'm at Dhammasukha, if I'm a little bit tired, I just go out and lie down and sleep. What I found about just myself, my own system, is I simply don't oversleep. If my body can sleep, it needs it. And then when I sleep and I get up and practice, then the mind is very still. But I think it's worthwhile, if you individually just kind of see how your system operates like that. Try to give it more sleep than you think it needs, and see what the effect on the mind is, and try to meditate when you're tired and see if you can. And you can meditate while you're really tired. You can work with it, but it's just a lot harder. And I tend to strain too much anyway, so it just wasn't helpful for me.
Yeah, sometimes I also have like a lot of energy in my body, and it helps if I go for a walk.
Yeah.
Back, and I'm like, okay, I'm more, I'm not as, what's the word, like anxious or restless. Yeah, restless. That's the word.
Yeah. So, Resting in the Waves. This is a book that was just released, and there's a whole section there on, I call it fluidity of practice. And I, particularly in the West, I think there's a lot of push to figure out what the best practice is and do just that. But I think the truth is, it's more like what you're saying, that there are some times when, for example, the mind is restless, and going for a walk or something like that is actually more skillful. And there are other times when, doing something different. Some of it I learned from Bhante, and it was, and he's strong about, not moving in a fairly disciplined practice. And when I was there for a long time, it's about every week or 10 days, he'd come by my kuti, in his truck and say, okay, we're going out for the day. And just go out and, we'd, drive around and go to some parks and, get lunch or something like that, and just take a break from the practice. And then when I went back for the next day, I was kind of hungry for it. The mind would settle right in. But I think Bhante was recognizing over time tend to push too hard and get tighter and tighter. And so I would just break it up. So I can't give a formula of how that's going to work for everybody, because all our systems are different, but it is something that over time to develop some wisdom in understanding how to work most skillfully and kindly with your system is really, really helpful. It's really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for the feedback. And I'm also a Taurus as well.
Oh, yay!
When's your birthday?
April 27th.
Okay, cool.
I find in the groups that I end up in all kinds of different places, that there's somewhere between a third and a quarter of the people are Tauruses. And statistically, it doesn't make, if it's just completely random. So I know you all end at 9, and so we're running out of time here. So, if 10 minutes when we're gone from here, you think, I wish I'd asked that or made that comment, now's your chance.
That's right. Last call. I'll ask.
Okay. Hi, Jody.
Hi. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having
My question is, I like watching comedies, and when I sit after watching comedy, of course, these images come up. So now I'm afraid to watch that. Oh, any comedy shows. Is that going too far, or how should I deal with it?
Oh, what a delightful problem to work with.
The whole time I'll be like, scaring all these images.
Yeah. So, my advice, I'm a strong believer in empirical trials. The way the Buddha taught, it's always a middle path. And so, on one extreme, you could go cold turkey and watch a comedy for the next 3 years. On the other is, you could watch 6 hours of comedies a day. But, there's probably a balance point somewhere in between. And so there's two parts of that. One is my balance point, and the other is to learn to work skillfully with a mind that just has all these images flashing through it. No matter what you do, whether you watch comedies or anything else, there's going to be a certain amount of that is going to happen of just human intelligence is the capacity to retain information and apply it to future things. So that's how we're wired, is to collect experiences and have them run through us. And to both experiment with, how much is optimal, but whatever you got at any given moment, of see how it is that you're relating to all those images that are coming through. And if you're repeating a mantra that says, oh, I watch too much comedy, that probably is not the most skillful way to approach it. But to see how, as a scene in a comedy comes up, what I like to talk about is shifting your focus from the content of the mind to the processes. And so as you're sitting there and the movie's going through your mind, just notice watching or thinking. And so you see what the mind is doing rather than what it's clamped onto. And as you see the process, my mind talks a lot, it explains a lot. So if I just see, oh, I'm thinking, I'm explaining, there's a tendency then for the content not to disappear, but to fade into the background a little bit. So you can see the processes of what the mind is actually doing. And as you can see the processes of what it's doing, it becomes easier to notice the qualities of the mind, whether they're wholesome, metta, compassion, kindness, or unwholesome. And that's where the metta practice starts, is actually with wholesome qualities. And so oftentimes it's hard to get from where we are in everyday life to those qualities. And I find that looking at the processes in the mind is a really good bridge, to help you get there more quickly.
Sometimes I notice the self and other, and I do the 6R at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you notice the self and other, and particularly when you're doing the 6Rs, recognize, release, and then notice where the tension is.
Okay.
And relax it, because there will be tension in both self and other. Okay. Without tension, there is no self and other. There's just the flow of experience. And so if you can see that tightness, that will help it all relax organically.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. I think it's a really, really wonderful talk again, Doug. Thank you so very much. And maybe we'll share merit together. Let me share my screens and everybody can see it.
Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck fearlessly. May the grieving shed and we all be
all we share this that we have thus acquired. for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness.
May being inhabiting space and
All Devas and Brahmans, Mother of mighty star, share this knowledge of ours.
may they long protect the Buddha's dispensation.
Sad, sad, sad.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken.
Have a lovely day. Thank you all for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank
You.